Hey everyone, it's Brett Hornby here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And say it's time to do another Calgary Flames trade retrospect, as I've already done several Calgary Flames trade retrospects, including the last one I made where I talked about when the Calgary Flames acquired Joe Mullen in February of the 1986 season. But I'm going to say with this trade retrospect, we'll talk about, I'm going to say, the first big rental that the Calgary Flames made in that same season, in the 1986 season, when they acquired John Tonelli from the New York Islanders. I mean, keep in mind I was 3 turning to 4 at that time, so I was really too young to remember and being excited that the Calgary Flames acquired John Tonelli. But my understanding is that this was definitely a trade that the Calgary Flames were looking to make to add some grit and experience to the lineup. As you recall, in 1986 was the first season that the Calgary Flames went to the Stanley Cup Finals. And John Tonelli is most synonymous and most known for playing with the New York Islanders, including winning 4 straight Stanley Cups with the New York Islanders from 1980 to 1983. And the New York Islanders went to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1984, where they lost to the Edmonton Oilers, after when the Edmonton Oilers beat them the year before. So the Calgary Flames were looking to add some big-time game experience to their lineup. And John Tonelli also has been involved in some big moments, as I know that John Tonelli, he assisted on Bob Nystrom's game-winning goal when the New York Islanders won their first Stanley Cup in overtime in 1980. And Bob Nystrom actually is the father of Eric Nystrom, who actually the Calgary Flames drafted in the first round in 2002, was a useful, bottom 6 forward for the Calgary Flames for many seasons. And then John Tonelli also played in both leagues, the World Hockey Association and the National Hockey League, where he played with the Houston Aeros in the World Hockey Association, where he got to play with Gordie Howe. Then he played with the New York Islanders. Then he played for the Calgary Flames after we made that trade, going back to March 11th, 1986. And actually the Calgary Flames were playing the New York Islanders the first game that John Tonelli was playing for the Calgary Flames, but he also played with the Los Angeles Kings. And he got to play with Wayne Gretzky there. And actually, I think John Tonelli is the only professional hockey player to say that he has a goal assisted on Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky in his career. So that's interesting. And he also played with the Chicago Blackhawks and the Quebec Nordiques. So what kind of set up this trade is that it was a combination of coming into the 1985-86 season, John Tonelli, after all he did with the New York Islanders, and actually I think the New York Islanders actually retired his number 27, but he had a contract dispute with the team coming into training camp, so things maybe turned sour on that front as well when it comes to John Tonelli camp. But the Calgary Flames, as I said, they had a fairly young team that was up and coming. I'm going to say his experience and grit that he brought to the Calgary Flames for the 1986 stretch drive and eventually the run to the Stanley Cup Finals might have played a role for some of the younger players who went through that experience in 1986 that eventually led to the team winning the Cup in 1989, including Lanny McDonald, who I also made a trade retrospect on back a few months or several months ago when the Calgary Flames acquired Lanny McDonald from the Colorado Rockies, who are now the New Jersey Devils franchise. But this wasn't a big trade that the Calgary Flames made in terms of number of players involved. As the Calgary Flames, they acquired John Tonelli from the New York Islanders. In exchange, they traded defenseman Steve Conrad and also fellow winger, left winger in Richard Crum. And interesting with both of those players and people is that Steve Conrad actually did play one more game with the Calgary Flames at the end of his career. And Richard Crum actually coached the Calgary Hitmen back in the day as well. So going back to John Tonelli, I'm going to say he definitely had a fairly solid career. I mean, enough for his New York Islanders to retire his number. But overall, in his career, he played 28 games in the National Hockey League. He scored 325 goals, 511 assists for 836 points, and 911 penalty minutes. So I'm going to say he was definitely a greasy power forward that definitely helped the Calgary Flames, especially to win that series against the Edmonton Oilers in 1986. Then in the playoffs, he definitely has a lot of games. Well, when you win 4 Stanley Cups and make 2 more trips to the Stanley Cup Finals. That piles on the games, as he played 172 Stanley Cup playoff games, scoring 40 goals, 75 assists for 115 points, and 200 penalty minutes. So it's definitely a complete player. I would say the Flames definitely could have loved having him for his whole career. But he was definitely a greasy power forward that I think the Calgary Flames were seeking when we made this trade back in 1986. And then the World Hockey Association, he also played 224 games, scored 61 goals, 89 assists, 150 points for 278 penalty minutes, and he played in 34 AVCO Cup games or WHL playoff games, when he scored 11 goals, 14 assists for 25 points and 38 penalty minutes. And then when you look at John Tonelli's best season, in the 1984-85 season, actually the season before, maybe he wanted more money the following season that made him expendable. In the 1984-85 season, in 80 games, he scored 42 goals, 58 assists for 100 points exactly for 95 penalty minutes. And then he played in 10 Stanley Cup playoff games for a goal, 8 assists for 9 points and 10 points. That was his best season. But he also had a 93-point season in 1982, the third year that the New York Islanders won the Stanley Cup. And then looking in the playoffs, well, the first year that the New York Islanders won the Stanley Cup, he played in 21 games. He had 7 goals, 9 assists for 16 points for 18 penalty minutes, and he got that 1 assist off of Bob Nystrom's overtime winner against the Philadelphia Flyers in 1980, when the New York Islanders won their first of 4 Stanley Cups. And Bob Nystrom, as I mentioned, or not sure if I mentioned, he is the father of Eric Nystrom, who the Calgary Flames drafted in 2002. So definitely was a very intriguing prospect or player that the Calgary Flames were looking to acquire to add experience to the Calgary Flames lineup. And I'm going to say it was a pretty good rental for the Calgary Flames, as in 1985-86, before he got traded to the Calgary Flames, and this happened on March 11th, 1986, which was the trade deadline then, and that was a month after the Calgary Flames acquired Joe Mullen from the St. Louis Blues. Well, in 65 games, he had 20 goals, 41 assists for 61 points and 50 penalty minutes. And that was after having that contract dispute at training camp, so I think things turned sour with the New York Islanders then. But then the Calgary Flames, he played 9 games with the Calgary Flames the rest of the season. He scored 3 goals, 4 assists for 70 points for 10 penalty minutes. But in the playoffs, he definitely played big for the Calgary Flames. A part of the playoff run, as in 22 games, where the Calgary Flames went all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. But it did eventually lose to the Montreal Canadiens in 5 games. They had this guy named Patrick Roy in there who stood on his head and was the difference in the series. But in the playoffs, he had 22 games, he had 7 goals, 9 assists for 16 points and 49 penalty minutes. And all those penalty minutes came in the second round against the Edmonton Oilers. So I'm going to say the Calgary Flames definitely got a return on their investment just on that alone. I'm going to say it was a rental, but he was still with the Calgary Flames for 2 more seasons. As in the 1986-87 season, he played 78 games. He scored 20 goals, 31 assists for 51 points and 72 penalty minutes. And then in the 1987 playoffs, where we got knocked out in the first round by the Winnipeg Jets, he only played 3 games and had 4 penalty minutes. And then in 1987-88, where he was benched in a few games, and I think things were falling out of favor with the Calgary Flames brass at the time. But his last season with the Calgary Flames, he still put up decent numbers for 74 games given at the time. He scored 70 goals, 41 assists for 58 points and 84 penalty minutes, but he only played in 6 playoff games in 1988. That Calgary Flames did get to the second round of the playoffs that season. Got swept by the Edmonton Oilers, who eventually went on to win the Stanley Cup. That's that series where you see that famous goal by Wayne Gretzky where he ripped one over the top of Mike Vernon in Game 2. And the Calgary Flames won the first of 2 President's trophies back-to-back that season. He had 6 games. He had 2 goals, 5 assists for 7 points in 8 games. So he had a point a game when he was in the playoffs, but definitely was benched and out of favor. But then eventually he signed with the Los Angeles Kings to play with Wayne Gretzky in his best season that he had with the Los Angeles Kings. Points-wise, well, he had back-to-back 31-goal seasons with the Los Angeles Kings in 1988-89 and 1989-90, where 1988-89 the Los Angeles Kings actually played against the Calgary Flames and actually got swept when the Flames won the Cup in 1989. But he had a 64-game point season in 89 and 89-90 and 68 game points in 89 and 90. And the Los Angeles Kings got revenge on the Calgary Flames in 1990 in the first round. And then he had a couple injury-riddled seasons with the Chicago Blackhawks in 1991-92. And he also played with the Quebec Nordiques that season. So he definitely was battling injuries, but that was towards the end of his career. But I would still say it was a nice rental for the Calgary Flames to get some great experience into the lineup for the Calgary Flames, and he does have his number 27 retired by the New York Islanders, so that's the John Tonelli part of the trade. So now if you look at the pieces that we gave up to get John Tonelli, well, the first player that we traded was Steve Conrad, a defenseman, who did start off his career with the Calgary Flames. He was one of the original Calgary Flames, where we drafted him 39th overall back in 1980. He played for the Calgary Flames. He also played for the New York Islanders, Chicago Blackhawks, the old Hartford Whalers, the Detroit Red Wings, and the Ottawa Senators. And actually, he did finish his career, his last NHL game. Actually did play with the Calgary Flames back in 1994-95, where he played a grand total of one game. I don't remember that game. That was during the lockout shortened season. But for a defenseman, he played 895 games overall. He had 41 goals, 195 assists for 236 points, 863 penalty minutes, and he did get to play in 97 Stanley Cup Playoff games with 10 goals, 15 assists for 25 points and 99 points. When looking at his numbers, best numbers that he had overall in the NHL with the Calgary Flames, well, his best season actually at the time when we traded him, he actually had his career high in points with the Calgary Flames and that season. And then 59 games, he had 7 goals, 20 assists for 27 points for 64 points. And then when we shipped him off to the New York Islanders, he had 14 points. For 14 games, he had 5 assists for 5 points overall and 16 penalty minutes. And then he never had a nice long run with the Calgary Flames, because his first season, he spent most of the time in junior. Because in the 1980-81 season, where the Calgary Flames' first season in Calgary, where they went to the Stanley Cup semifinals or the third round, he only played 4 games. He had 4 penalty minutes. But the Calgary Flames didn't use Steve Conrad during the run in the 1981 Stanley Cup Playoffs. And he also only played a grand total of, he only played 3 playoff, well, in 1982 he did only play 3 games against the Vancouver Canucks, as we had a short run that year. But he never had a nice long run with the Calgary Flames in the playoffs. But he definitely was a solid stay-at-home defenseman for the Calgary Flames, where we shipped him off to the New York Islanders. And then, he played parts of 4 seasons with the New York Islanders, and then he played parts of 4 seasons with the Chicago Blackhawks, and then he played parts of 2 seasons with the Hartford Whalers, and then he also played with the Detroit Red Wings in 93-94, and then he played with the Ottawa Senators in 94. And then 94-95, he played grand total 1 game with the Calgary Flames. So I'm going to say it was a solid career for Steve Conrad. Nothing out of the ordinary. Didn't win any hardware or any Stanley Cups. But he is actually on the NBC Sports Chicago broadcast for the Chicago Blackhawks. So that's where you can see Steve Conrad right now today, according to Wikipedia. And then the other player that the Calgary Flames gave up when we shipped him off to the New York Islanders is Richard Crum, who the Calgary Flames drafted him 37th overall in 1982. And he only played for 2 teams in the NHL, here with the Calgary Flames and with the New York Islanders, and he was also a left winger. So this is where he had more offense. So overall in his NHL career, he actually only played 372 games. He had 70 goals, 103 assists for 173 points overall, and 138 penalty minutes. And then he played in 36 Stanley Cup playoff games, where he had 2 goals, 6 assists for 8 points for 22 points. So looking at his best year with the Calgary Flames numbers-wise was in the 1984-85 season, that he played 73 games. He had 20 goals, 32 assists for 52 points and 32 penalty minutes. And then when it comes to playoffs, well, the longest playoff run that he had with the Calgary Flames was in 1984, when we got to the second round but lost to the Edmonton Oilers. In that season, he had 53 games after he played with the Western Hockey League with the Portland Winterhawks. In 53 games with the Calgary Flames in 1983-84, He had 11 goals, 12 assists, or 23 points for 27 points, and then he played in 11 Stanley Cup playoff games with the Calgary Flames. 1 goal, 1 assist for 2 points for 1 goal, 1 assist for 2 points and 9 penalty minutes. And then at the time when we traded him to the New York Islanders, in 63 games, he had 12 goals, 17 assists, or 29 points for 31 penalty minutes. And then when we sent him to the New York Islanders, actually, he got a point out of game out of him, because after 14 games, he had 7 goals, 7 assists, 14 points for 4 penalty minutes the rest of the season. 1985-86, when he was traded for John Tonelli with Steve Conrad, then he played in 3 Stanley Cup playoff games with 1 assist and no penalty minutes. And then I'm going to say his best season with the New York Islanders was his first full season, 1986-87. In 70 games, he had 12 goals, 70 assists for 29 points for 20 penalty minutes, and then he played in 14 Stanley Cup playoff games, where half his playoff games almost came in. He had 1 goal, 3 assists for 4 points for 4 penalty minutes. So I'm going to say, looking back on this trade, given what the Calgary Flames were needing and seeking at the time, they were looking for some playoff experience, some grit, and some heart that he was part of those 4 Stanley Cups with the New York Islanders in the early part of the 1980s. I'm going to say the Calgary Flames did very well for trading away a solid stay-at-home defenseman and a left winger that didn't have as long of a career. And in turn, we got ultimately a New York Islanders legend that his number is retired by the New York Islanders. And then, interestingly, you can say he assisted on a goal of Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky in his hockey career. And I think he's the only professional hockey player that can say that, because he was a teammate of Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky at the same time, if you count the WHA. So what do you think of this trade, Retrospect? When the Calgary Flames acquired John Tonelli from the New York Islanders, looking back, it's definitely interesting that we picked up this player, and he looked like a player that, we would like to have now. Someone with big game clutch experience and scores the big goals, gets a little greasy at times. Definitely was a throwback back then, back in 1986, but I'm going to say he was a huge part of the Calgary Flames making it to the Stanley Cup Finals, and was definitely a role model for some of the younger players. And we also acquired other pieces along the way to eventually win the Stanley Cup in 1989, but I think we can, in some small way, can thank John Tonelli. So what do you remember, or what you thought of this trade? It sounded like the New York Islanders were almost ready to move on from him because things got sour with management, and it's just, when I read the story about even when he was held out of games down the stretch in the playoffs in 1988, it almost felt like the Calgary Flames, I think, were almost ready to move on him. I think just because he was getting older and we had an up-and-coming team that was looking to take that next step to win the Stanley Cup. And when John Tonelli signed with the Los Angeles Kings, I think he had a little bit of a resurgence because he had more ice time playing with Wayne Gretzky. And then ultimately the Calgary Flames won the Stanley Cup the next season, but then I guess he had revenge on the Calgary Flames with the Los Angeles Kings in 1990. So as I want to say, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fans' journey, home of the Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, I mostly do talk Calgary sports on my YouTube channel, like recapping games and stories, or done a bunch of Calgary Flames trade retrospects. Like this, for example, when we acquired John Tonelli. I'm going to say this was the first big rental that the Calgary Flames made in their franchise history to look to take that next step. This is what I'm going to say, the Calgary Flames were big buyers at that time. But I also did other trade respects, where I talked about Joe Mullen, talked about when we acquired Ryan McDonald, and I also had 3 trade respects on Jerome McGinley. The time when we traded Joe Newendike for this Jerome McGinley guy. Then I also talked about Jerome McGinley when we shipped him off to Pittsburgh. And then I also talked about the trade that was reported but didn't happen, where he was reported to go to the Boston Bruins. And then I also did one of the worst trades in Calgary Flames history, where I talked about when we traded Dion Phaneuf and Doug Gilmour. Ooh. But I think I'm going to have to make a trade retrospect when we got Doug Gilmour, and I got a few other trade retrospects that I plan to make in the summer, because there's definitely some interesting players that we acquired in the off-season. I think I might have a little more time to do that in the off-season, but I also do personal vlogs, attempt to comedy, and also do share my experiences that I'm on the road or as a sporting event, and I'm also experimented to try to do some more on-the-go vlogging. So if it all sounds like it'd be interesting to watch, to follow along with this Calgary sports fans journey, you know what you do, just make sure to like, subscribe. I also have my other social links down in the description below. So even if you're not a Calgary sports fan, I hope there is content for you to enjoy as well. So I'm just going to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.